The Montana mountains do not forgive and they do not wait. They rise around a town called Coldwater, like the cold gray walls of something half grave, half fortress. High above that town, at the end of a road that is barely a road, a log house sits in a clearing. Inside, a hearth burns. A child who has not laughed in 3 years sleeps behind a shut door. And three hard men carry a secret that began with a letter none of them will admit to writing. Now look down the trail. A woman climbs it alone. Her dead mother's boots are coming apart at the sole. A leather satchel hangs from her shoulder heavier than it looks, and it holds the only thing standing between this family and the grave. She does not know a doctor is already saddling his horse. She does not know he is coming for her name. She keeps climbing. The light is going fast. The stage from Carrington dropped Adeline Greer at the bottom of the mountain and did not wait to see whether she lived or died. That was the first thing she learned about Montana territory. It did not wait. She stood in the rutted road with her trunk at her feet and watched the coach shrink into the distance, and the dust it kicked up hung in the air long after the wheels were gone. The town behind her was called Coldwater, a name she thought that did not promise much. 12 buildings, a church with a crooked steeple, a general store with a porch that sagged in the middle like a tired horse, and mountains, mountains everywhere. They rose up around the town the way the sides of a grave rise up around a coffin, and she hated herself for the thought the moment it arrived because she had promised herself all the long way west that she would not think like that anymore. She was 22 years old. She had $11 sewn into the hem of her dress, and she had a letter. The letter was the reason she was here. She had read it so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. She did not need to take it out to remember it. But she took it out anyway there in the empty road because holding it made the mountains feel smaller. A man named Garrett Drennan had written it, or so the letter said. It was not a romantic letter. That was what had undone her. She had received 3 proposals by mail in her life, and 2 of them had been full of the kind of sweetness that tasted like spoiled fruit. Men describing her hair which they had never seen. Men promising her happiness, which they could not possibly own. But this letter had talked about the way light came down a mountain in the late afternoon. It had talked about a daughter who did not speak much and a house that had gone quiet. It had said near the end in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper, I will not pretend I can give you an easy life. I can only promise you an honest one. An honest one. She had read that line, and something in her chest had unlocked. Because Adeline Greer had spent the last 14 months of her life being called a liar. She folded the letter, put it away, picked up the handle of her trunk, and discovered the way a person discovers a stone in their shoe that no one had come to meet her. The letter had said someone would. She stood with that knowledge for a while. The wind came down off the mountains and went through her traveling dress like the dress was not there. It was spring, but spring in this country apparently meant something different than it had back in Ohio. Back home, spring was mud and green and the smell of the earth waking up. Here it was a knife. She pulled her shawl tighter, and it did not help. A boy was watching her from the porch of the general store. 10, maybe 11. The careful, unhurried stare of a child in a town where nothing happened. You lost Mrs., he called. I am looking for the Drennan place. The boy's whole face changed. It was a small change. But she had spent 14 months learning to read the small changes in faces because the small changes were the ones that told the truth. The Drennan place, he repeated. Yes, up the mountain. He pointed. He pointed at a wall of trees and rock, and nothing that looked remotely like a road. 3 pines. But there ain't a coach goes up there. There ain't hardly a road goes up there. How far? The boy considered her trunk, considered her boots, which had been her mother's boots and which had carried her mother through 20 years of walking to other people's houses to deliver other people's babies, and which were now, Adeline knew, very near the end of their long, honest life. Far, the boy said, real far. She thanked him. She did not know why people thanked children for bad news, but she did it. And then she did the thing she had become very good at. She set her chin. She left her trunk with the boy's mother at the store, who agreed to keep it for a coin, and she kept only the one thing he would not leave anywhere: a leather satchel, worn pale at the corners, heavier than it looked, and she started up the mountain. The thing about walking up a mountain is that the mountain does not care about you. Adeline learned this in the first hour. She had thought foolishly that she understood hardship. She had buried her mother. She had been turned out of a town with her name in tatters behind her. She had ridden west for 9 days in a coach packed with strangers, and she had thought somewhere around the fourth day, I have already survived the worst of it. The mountain disagreed. The road where there was a road climbed, and then it climbed more steeply. The trees pressed in dark and resinous, and the smell of them was so sharp it sat at the back of her throat like a taste. Pine, cold sap, wet stone. Her mother's boots, which had been brave for so long, began to come apart at the left sole, and she felt the cold of the ground come up through the gap with every step, and she did not stop. Because stopping was a decision, and she had made all her decisions already. She had made them in a rented room in Ohio with $11 and a letter and a choice between this and nothing. So she walked. The light started to go, not slowly. The mountain ate it. One moment the trees were green and the next they were black, shapes against a sky the color of a bruise. And the wind found a new voice for the evening, a low one, and somewhere far off, something made a sound that was not a bird. That was when Adeline Greer, who did not cry, who had not cried at her own mother's grave because there had been a man from the county there waiting to ask her questions, felt her eyes begin to sting. Not from sorrow, from the simple animal fear of being a small, warm thing alone in a large, cold dark. And then she smelled smoke. Wood smoke. Real wood smoke, the kind that meant a hearth, a roof, walls. She came around a shoulder of rock, and there it was below her in a clearing, gold light leaking from the windows. And she nearly wept again, this time from relief, because she had begun, in the last black half mile, to wonder if Three Pines was a real place or only a thing a man had invented in a letter. It was real. It was a log house, long and low and solid, and a barn behind it, and smaller buildings, in a corral, and the whole of it had the look of a place built by hands that knew exactly what they were doing and had taken their time. A dog began to bark. A door opened, and Adeline Greer walked the last 100 yards of her old life toward the gold light, not knowing it was the last 100 yards the way none of us ever know. 3 men came out onto the porch. She had not expected 3. The letter had said, a daughter. The letter had said, a quiet house. The letter had not said brothers, and her tired mind tripped over the arithmetic of them, because she had built a small, careful picture of this place over many weeks. And the picture had 1 man in it, and now there were 3 standing in the spilled gold light with a dog circling their boots. They were not small men. That was the first thing. The mountain apparently grew them tall. The one in the center came down the steps first. He was the oldest. She knew it before he said a word, knew it the way you know which tree in a stand is the oldest something in the way the years had set into him. Dark hair with the first frost of gray at the temples, a jaw that had not been shaved in 2 or 3 days, and eyes, when the light caught them, the gray of a sky that has not yet decided whether to storm. He looked at her. He looked at the satchel. He looked at the ruin of her boots, and he said, "Who are you?" Oh. Not unkindly, but not kindly either. It was the voice of a man asking a question he already suspected he would not like the answer to. "My name is Adeline Greer." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, and she was grateful to it. "I have come a long way to be here. I am looking for Garrett Drennan." Something happened on the porch. It was not loud. Nothing about these men she would come to learn was loud. But the second brother, the one nearest the door, went very still. And the third brother, the youngest, looked down at his own boots. And the oldest man in front of her, the one with the storm in his eyes, drew in a breath through his nose, slow the way a man does when he is holding something and does not want it to show. "I am Garrett Drennan," he said. Relief moved through her, warm and total. She actually smiled. After the mountain in the dark and the thing in the trees that was not a bird, she smiled at this hard, tall stranger and she said, "Then I am glad to finally meet you. Your letter is the reason I am still standing." And Garrett Drennan said, "I never wrote you a letter." The fire in the main room of the Drennan house was large and well kept, and threw heat clear across the room, and Adeline sat as close to it as politeness allowed, and she could not get warm. It was not the kind of cold that came from outside. Because she had just been told by the man she had crossed a continent to marry that she did not exist to him, that her letter did not exist, that the careful weeks of paper and ink that had carried her here line by line like stones laid across a river had not been laid by the man now standing rigid by the mantel with his back half to her. "Show me," he had said when she insisted. So she had shown him. She had taken the letter from inside her dress with hands that were not quite steady, and she had held it out, and he had taken it, and she had watched his face as he read his own words. She watched his face change. She watched a man read a letter he had not written and recognize all the same every single thing inside it. The youngest brother had built up the fire. The middle brother had brought her coffee in a tin cup, and his hand, she noticed, was not steady either. And now the three of them stood in a rough triangle around her, like men around a thing that had fallen out of the sky, and the silence stretched until she could not bear it. "Someone," she said, "wrote me this letter. Someone signed your name to it. Someone told me a coach would carry me part way and a wagon would meet me at Coldwater. Someone has been writing to me since the first frost." Her voice did not break. She was proud of that later when she had time to be proud of things. "I am not a foolish woman, Mr. Drennan. I did not cross the country on a whim. I crossed it on a promise, and I would like to know which of you made it." The middle brother set down the coffee pot. "That was me," said Wesley Drennan. He was 30 or near it, warmer in the face than his older brother, quicker with the kind of looks that had probably gotten him out of trouble his whole life and into a fair amount of it first. He did not look away from her when he said it. She gave him that. A liar who keeps his eyes on you is at least an honest kind of liar. "You wrote them," she said. "I wrote them down." "That is the same thing." "No, Mrs." Wesley shook his head slow. "It is not. And that is the part I have got to make you understand before you hate the wrong man." Garrett said low, "Wes." She walked up the mountain, Garrett. "Wes." "In the dark. Look at her boots." And the oldest brother looked at her boots again, and Adeline watched something move across his hard face that she could not name yet, and Wesley Drennan turned back to her and told her the truth, and the truth was worse and stranger, and in the end sadder than the lie had been. Here is what Wesley told her. Their brother Garrett had been married. The wife's name had been Lenora. There had been a daughter, Etta, who was 6 now, and who was asleep in the next room and who had not. Wesley said, his voice dropping, spoken more than 10 words at a stretch in 3 years. Because 3 years ago, Lenora had taken a fever in her lungs. And 3 years ago, Lenora had died of it. And the man who had been laughing and easy and quick to sing, the man who had courted Lenora with wildflowers stolen from other men's meadows, that man had died too in every way that did not require burying, and what was left was the silent one by the mantle. "My brother does not believe he is owed a second life," Wesley said. "He believes he had his turn at it and ruined it. He will not say so. He has never once said so. But Asa and I have watched him for 3 years, and we have watched that little girl grow up in a house with no laughter in it, and last autumn we decided we were done watching." "So you advertised," Adeline said, "for a bride in his name." "We did. Without telling him. Without telling him." She looked at Garrett Drennan. He was looking at the fire. The letter was still in his hand, and she saw even from across the room that he had folded it back along its old creases. "Carefully, the way you handle a thing that belongs to someone else." And the words, she said quieter now, because this was the part that mattered. This was the part with her whole foolish heart inside it. The words in the letters, the light coming down the mountain, the honest life, the part about how grief does not leave it, only learns to sit quieter. Who wrote those words, Mr. Drennan? Wesley opened his mouth, and for the first time since she had arrived, Garrett Drennan spoke without being made to. It does not matter, he said. You will be on the coach Friday. I will pay your passage home, and I will pay you for your trouble. And I am sorry. You were lied to. You should not have been. But there is no marriage here, Miss Greer. There is no place here for you. The fire popped. And Adeline Greer, 22 years old, $11 to her name, 400 miles past the last town that knew her, face looked at this man who wanted to pay her to disappear and felt something rise in her that was not despair. It was the other thing. It was the thing that had walked her up the mountain. I cannot go home, she said. You can. I will see to the putt. You misunderstand me. She stood. The satchel was at her feet and she did not pick it up, not yet, but she put her hand on the strap of it, the way another woman might put her hand on a Bible. I am not telling you I lack the fare. I am telling you there is no home. The town I came from does not want me back. I will tell you why, because you have been honest with me, and I find I would rather be honest and comfortable. She drew a breath. I am a healer. My mother was a midwife and a herb woman, and she taught me everything the earth had taught her, and for 2 years after she died, I did her work in our town. And I was good at it, Mr. Drennan. I want you to hear that plainly because no one there will ever say it again. I was good. The youngest brother, Asa, had lifted his head. And then a man died, Adeline said. An old man, a man whose heart had been failing for a year, a man 2 real doctors had already given up, a man who asked me to ease his last weeks. And I did. And when he died, his son needed somewhere to put his grief, and a young woman with no husband and no license and her dead mother's satchel was a very easy place to put it. She heard her own voice get low and hard and did not stop it. They called it unlawful practice. They called it worse than that in the church where I could hear. And by the time the talk had finished with me, there was not a family in that town that would let me through the door. So when a letter came from Montana from a man who said he could not promise me an easy life, only an honest one, I thought. She stopped. She made herself finish. I thought here at last is a man who knows that an honest life and an easy one are not the same animal. I packed my mother's boots and I came. No one moved. The fire was the only sound and the wind under the eaves, and somewhere far back in the house, a clock she could not see. So you may put me on the Friday coach, Adeline said. That is your right. The lie was not yours and the choice is. But I will not pretend to make it easier for you that there is a soft place waiting for me at the other end of the line. There is not. There is a town that will be glad to see I have not come back. And she sat down again, because her legs had decided the speech was over. Garrett Drennan looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the letter on the mantel, squared it with one finger, and walked out of his own house into the dark, and the door shut behind him with a sound like a sentence ending. She slept that night in a small room off the kitchen that had clearly not been slept in for years. Wesley had shown her to it, apologizing the whole way, and Asa, the youngest, the silent one, had appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later with an armful of quilts and set them down and left without a word. And she had understood that this was how the youngest Drennan said things, by the things he carried. She lay under the borrowed quilts and listened to the unfamiliar house and did not sleep for a long time because she was doing arithmetic again. $11, 4 days until Friday. A town behind her that did not want her, and a coach Friday that would carry her back toward it. And under all the arithmetic, like a stone under cold water, the things she did not want to look at directly. The letters were real. That was the cruelty of it. A lie, a clean lie she could have hated and recovered from. But the letters had not been a lie. Someone in this house had truly written those words. Someone in this house had truly thought about the way light came down a mountain and had truly believed that grief learns to sit quieter and had truly meant the line that had unlocked her chest in a rented room in Ohio. The man was real. She had simply, it seemed, been told the wrong name for him. Or she turned the thought over. Or she had been told the right name. And the man it belonged to did not yet know the words were his. In the morning she met the child. Adeline had risen before the sun out of a habit her mother had drilled into her, and she had found the kitchen and found the stove and found with a healer's quick inventory that this was a house where the cooking was done by men who regarded it as a battle to be won quickly rather than a thing to be enjoyed. So she had done what her hands knew how to do. She had made the kitchen warm. She had made coffee that did not taste like a punishment. She had found flour and found her rhythm, and she was turning dough on the board sleeves, pushed up flour to the elbow when she felt the particular weight of being watched. A small girl stood in the doorway, dark hair uncombed, a nightdress too thin for the morning, and her father's eyes exactly the gray of an undecided sky, set in a face so solemn and so pale that Adeline's healer instincts woke all at once and began without being asked to count. The thinness of the wrists, the faint blue cast under the eyes, the way the child held herself careful like someone who had learned the house was a place where you did not make noise. The girl was holding a rag doll much loved, much mended, and even from across the kitchen, Adeline could see that one of its arms had come away at the shoulder and hung now by three brave threads. Neither of them spoke. Adeline had raised children's trust before. You did not chase it. You did not coax it. You simply kept doing the warm, ordinary thing you were doing and let the child decide that the room was safe. So she turned the dough, and she did not look directly at the girl. And after a long while, a voice very small, the voice of someone using a tool she did not get much practice with, said, "Her name is Bess." "That is a fine name," Adeline said to the dough. Her arm came off. "I see that." Silence. The fire ticked. Adeline shaped a loaf and did not look up. "Pa cannot fix it," the girl said. "He tried. It came off again." A pause, and then in a rush, the longest sentence Adeline had yet heard from her. "He does not say so, but I think it makes him sad to try, so I stopped asking him." And there it was. The whole shape of this house handed to Adeline by a 6-year-old in a thin nightdress before the sun was even up. A man so afraid of failing the people he loved that he had stopped reaching toward them. And a child who had learned the way children always learn to stop asking to make herself small, to carry her broken things quietly so as not to add to the weight a grown person was already buckling under. Adeline wiped her hands on her apron. She crossed the kitchen and she crouched down so that her eyes were level with the girl's eyes, and she said, "I am Adeline, and I am very good at arms. May I see her?" Etta Drennan looked at her for a long, weighing moment. Then she held out the doll. It took 4 minutes. A needle from the satchel thread the right weight, the trick of anchoring the shoulder from the inside that Adeline's mother had used on 100 dolls in 100 sick rooms to give frightened children something to hold while the grown talk went on over their heads. 4 minutes. And when she handed Bess back with both arms firmly attached, the girl did not smile, not quite. But something behind her face shifted like a curtain moved by a draft, and she hugged the doll hard against her chest and whispered, "Thank you," and fled. Adeline stood up and found Garrett Drennan in the doorway. She did not know how long he had been there. Long enough. His face was doing the thing again, the thing she could not yet name, the thing that was not softness, but was the place where softness used to live before something built a wall in front of it. He did not mention the doll. What he said was, "Asa is taking the south timber down today. We are short a hand. I would not normally ask it of a guest." A pause. The words seemed to cost him. "But you are not, as it turns out, a guest. Not quite, not yet. There is wood to be split and water to be hauled while you are under this roof, and I find I would rather you earned your keep than took my charity. You said yourself the two are not the same animal." It was not a welcome. It was the smallest, hardest, most grudging door in the world opened the width of one finger. Adeline Greer looked at the man who had walked out of his own house rather than answer one question, and she understood that this finger width of a door was for him an enormous and frightening thing. And she had the sudden conviction standing there in the flower light that her whole life now turned on what she said next. "I will haul your water, Mr. Drennan," she said, "and split your wood. Gladly. On one condition." His jaw set. "I do not bargain. It is a small one." She held his gray gaze and did not let go of it. "Stop calling me a guest, and stop calling me Mrs. My name is Adeline. If I am to earn my place in this house, I would like the house to know what to call me while I do it." For one moment, one single moment, the corner of Garrett Drennan's mouth moved. It was not a smile. She would not have insulted it by calling it a smile. But it was the rumor of one, the distant cousin of one, and it was gone almost before it arrived, and he said only, "Adeline, then," and turned and was gone, and she stood in the kitchen with her heart doing something complicated and was honest enough with herself to call the something hope. She earned her keep. 3 days. She earned it with her back and her hands and the particular stubbornness her mother had bred into her bones, and the Drennan brothers, who had expected she could tell a soft Eastern woman who would weep at a splinter, watched her haul and split and carry and slowly, grudgingly rearrange their opinion of her. She learned the shape of them in those 3 days. Wesley was the talker. Wesley filled the silences, the way water fills a low place, and she came to understand that he did it on purpose, that he had appointed himself the noise of this house because the alternative was for the house to be silent, and a silent house had nearly killed his brother. Wesley made her laugh twice. She was ashamed of how much she needed it. Asa was the youngest and the largest, and the most quieter even than Garrett, and he moved with a hitch in his left leg that she clocked the first morning and did not mention. He did not talk. He carried. He had carried the quilts. On the second day, she found her mother's boots, which she had set by the kitchen door, mended. Resoled. The split in the left one closed with a patch of leather, so neat it might have been done by a cobbler, and no one said a word about it. And when she looked at Asa across the supper table, he looked very hard at his plate, and she understood that she had been thanked again in the only language he trusted. And Garrett she watched the most and understood the least. He worked harder than any man she had known, and he spoke less than seemed possible for a living person, and he did not in 3 days meet her eyes for longer than a moment. But she caught him. She caught him at the edges. She caught him watching from the barn door while she taught Etta the names of the herbs in her satchel yarrow and plantain and willow bark, the child sounding the strange words out slow. She caught him pausing, axe in hand, when laughter came out of the kitchen window, pausing the way a man pauses at a sound he has not heard in a long time and is not sure he is allowed to enjoy. She caught him once standing in front of the mantel, looking at a folded letter, and she stepped back out of the doorway before he could see her, and her heart was loud the whole way back to the woodpile. Friday was coming. No one spoke of it. But it was coming the way the dark had come down the mountain that first night, not slowly, and Adeline lay awake on Thursday, counting her $11 in the dark and telling herself she had survived worse, knowing it was true, knowing also that knowing it did not help. And then the mountain, which did not wait and did not care, decided the matter for all of them. It was past noon on Thursday when the sound came down off the south ridge. Adeline was at the well. She had her hands on the rope and the bucket coming up cold and heavy, and the sound reached her across the clearing, and her whole body knew what it was before her mind had finished the thought, because some sounds a healer's body simply knows. The crack of timber going wrong. The shout that is not a working shout. And then the second sound, the worst one, the silence after. She dropped the bucket. She was already running. Wesley reached the south timber a stride ahead of her, and Garrett a stride ahead of him, the three of them crashing through the trees, and Adeline came over the rise and saw, and the healer in her stepped forward and took the body's fear away and left only the cold, clear seeing. A pine had come down wrong. That was the whole story written in the clearing. A widowmaker, her mother would have called it a tree that twists as it falls, and it had caught Asa Drennan across the lower leg, and the leg, when Adeline reached him and went down on her knees in the pine needles, was a thing she had seen the like of perhaps 3 times in her life. The break was bad, but the break was not the danger. The danger was the long, deep, tearing wound the bark had opened along the calf, already welling, and already filling with the dark dirt and splinter of the forest floor. And the danger was the next hours and the next days, and the danger had a name. And the name was the thing that had killed more strong young men on the frontier than bullets ever had. Asa was conscious. That was bad too for him, though good for her. His face had gone the gray of old ash, and his jaw was locked white against the screaming. His pride would not let out, and he found her face with his eyes and held on to it. Adeline, Garrett's voice behind her. Stripped down to the bone. Tell me. She did not turn around. She had her hands on the wound, and she was already doing the arithmetic that mattered now, the only arithmetic now. He needs the leg set and the wound clean, she said. Clean deep, clean right, and he needs it within the hour, not the day. She lifted her head and looked at the 3 faces above her, 2 brothers and a father, all of them looking at her the way drowning men look at a rope. Is there a doctor? Coldwater, Wesley said. Dr. Pruitt, but it is 3 hours down and back, and that is if his horse is fresh. 3 hours. Adeline looked down at the wound, at the dirt in it, at the youngest Drennan who had carried her quilts and mended her mother's boots, and said almost nothing, and meant all of it, and who would lose this leg, and very possibly his life somewhere in the fever of the next 3 days if the 3 hours were wasted. She had a choice. She felt it arrive whole and terrible the way she had felt the cold come up through the split in her boot. She could stand back. She could let them send for Dr. Pruitt and wash her hands of it and be on the Friday coach with her name still only quietly ruined instead of loudly, because she knew what it looked like. An unlicensed woman, a stranger of 4 days, putting her hands into the open wound of a man whose family had not yet decided if she was anything at all. She knew exactly what it looked like, and she knew exactly what the dirt in that wound was going to do. Send for him, Adeline said. Send for Dr. Pruitt. Wesley, ride now. Ride hard and bring him. Relief started across Garrett's face. But I am not going to wait for him, she said, and watched the relief stop. I am sorry, I will not. If I wait 3 hours, this wound will already be lost, and so very likely will your brother. So I am going to tell you what I need, and you are going to decide right now whether you trust a woman you met on Tuesday with the life of the man bleeding in front of you. I cannot make that choice for Yuku. But the mountain is making it fast, Mr. Drennan, so make it fast. Garrett Drennan looked at her. 3 days she had tried to read this man and failed. 3 days of catching him only at the edges. And now, in the worst moment with his youngest brother, gray on the ground between them, she watched Garrett Drennan's face do something it had not done once since she arrived. She watched it open. What do you need, he said. And Adeline Greer, her liar's bride, 4 days a stranger on this mountain, rolled her sleeves to the elbow and reached into her mother's satchel and began against every safe and sensible thing to fight for the life of a Drennan. What she did not know. What none of them knew as Wesley's horse tore down the mountain toward Coldwater to fetch help that would arrive too late to be the hero, was that the doctor riding back up that mountain was not bringing rescue. He was bringing the second half of her ruin, because Dr. Ambrose Pruitt had been the only physician in this territory for 11 years. He had buried Lenora Drennan 3 years ago and called it the will of God. And he was a man who had never in his life forgiven anyone for being right where he had been wrong. He did not know her name yet, but he was coming up the mountain. And the mountain, as Adeline had already learned, did not wait. It did not care, and it was not finished with her. The first hour belonged to Adeline. She would remember it later in pieces. The cold of the well water she sent Etta running for bucket after bucket. The needle, the catgut. Her mother's voice in her ear steady the way it had been steady in 100 sick rooms. Clean it deep. Clean it right. The dirt is the enemy, not the blood. She cleaned it deep. She cleaned it right. Garrett held his brother's shoulders the whole time, did not speak, did not look away. Asa's jaw stayed locked white, and his eyes stayed on the patch of sky between the pines, and only once, a sound escaped him, and Garrett leaned down and said something low into his brother's ear that Adeline did not catch and was not meant to. She set the leg. She bound it to a splint Asa himself had cut months ago for a fence rail, and which now held the bones of the man who cut it. She packed the wound with a poultice of crushed plantain and yarrow green and fragrant, the smell of it rising up through the smell of blood and pine. And she made him drink. Willow bark bitter as a hard word, and the bitterer thing under it that her mother had only ever used when the fever was coming, and the fever could not be allowed to win. By the time the light started to slant gold through the timber, Asa Drennan was alive, pale, drifting, but alive and breathing slow, and the leg was clean. That was when the bunny began to bark down by the house. Dr. Ambrose Pruitt arrived 3 hours and 40 minutes after Wesley's horse had gone for him, and he arrived the way weather arrives. He came up the last of the trail on a tired horse, and he was a heavy man, soft in the way that men who give orders go soft, with a face the color of a brick, and small, quick eyes, and he wore a black coat that had been good once, and a watch chain that he touched. Adeline noticed the way other men touched a gun, for reassurance, for the weight of it. He came into the timber clearing where they had built a fire and laid Asa on a bed of cut boughs, and he looked at the splinted leg and the clean poultice and the bitter cup and the woman kneeling in the pine needles with blood dried to her forearms. And Dr. Pruitt did not say, "Well done." He said, "Who did this?" "I did," Adeline said. She got to her feet, slow. Every muscle in her back had gone to stone in the last 4 hours, and she let none of it show because she had met men like Ambrose Pruitt before, and the one thing you did not do with a man like that was let him see you ache. "And who," said Dr. Pruitt, "are you?" "Adeline Greer." Greer. He tasted the name, found nothing in it yet. He would later. He was a patient man, Pruitt, the way a stain is patient. He crouched beside Asa with a grunt and put his soft fingers near the wound, and Adeline watched him not quite touch. It watched him see that the bleeding was stopped, and the dirt was gone, and the bones were true, and she watched the brick of his face go a darker shade of brick, because she had not left him anything to do. That was the unforgivable thing. Not that she had been wrong, that she had been right in his territory in his 11 years of being the only voice that mattered for 100 miles, and she had done it with leaves. "This is folk nonsense," Pruitt said, standing. "Poultices, bark tea. You have been very lucky, young woman, that you have not killed him." "He is not dead," Adeline said, "and the wound is clean. You are welcome to examine it and find otherwise." "Luck. Then I will take the luck. He has the use of it." Garrett had said nothing through all of this. He stood at the edge of the firelight with his arms folded and his face shut, and Adeline could not tell. And it frightened her how much she wanted to be able to tell which way this man was going to fall. Pruitt had buried his wife. Pruitt was the law of the body in this country. Pruitt was the voice the church listened to. And she was 4 days off a coach with a ruined name riding 3 hours behind her down the mountain catching up. Pruitt turned to Garrett, man to man, the way such men always did. "Mr. Drennan, I will dress the wound properly. In the morning, if there is fever, and there will be, I will open it and treat it as a Christian doctor treats a wound, and we will hope this woman's meddling has not cost your brother his leg." He pulled his coat straight. "Where shall I sleep?" And Garrett Drennan looked a long time at the doctor, and then he looked a long time at Adeline. And he said, "She set the leg. She will keep it. You may dress it however you like, doctor, and you may stay the night and welcome. But if there is fever in the morning, it is her hands I want on him, not yours." The fire popped. Pruitt's small eyes moved from the man to the woman and back, and something settled into them cold and final, like a door closing in a far room of a house. Adeline had won the leg. She did not yet understand what it had cost her. There was no fever in the morning, nor the next morning, nor the one after that. Adeline changed the poultice every 6 hours, day and dark, and each time the green pulp came away stained with the wound's poison. And each time the flesh beneath it was a little less angry, a little more its own color. And on the fourth morning, Asa Drennan opened his eyes all the way and looked at the ceiling of his own room and said in the cracked voice of a man returning from a far place, "I am hungry." Wesley laughed out loud, a bark of pure relief, and Garrett, who had slept those 4 nights in a chair in the doorway of his brother's room, put his face in his hands for one moment, just one, and then took it away again, composed before anyone was meant to have seen. Adeline saw. Adeline always saw. Dr. Pruitt had left on the second day. He had dressed the wound once with a great show of clean linen and a tincture that smelled of nothing helpful, and he had pronounced on his way to his horse that if the legs survived, it would be God's mercy and not the woman's leaves. And then he had ridden down the mountain, and Adeline had stood on the porch and watched him go, and felt no relief at all, only the flat certainty that she had made an enemy, and that the enemy was a careful man. But that was 4 days ago, and the leg had survived. And it had not been God's mercy. It had been plantain and yarrow and willow bark, and a woman who did not sleep, and every soul on that mountain knew it. Friday had come and gone. No one had spoken of the coach. That was the thing Adeline noticed the morning Isa asked for food. Friday had come, the Friday she was meant to leave on, and it had gone, and not one of the 3 Drennan men had said a word about it, and her trunk was still in Coldwater with the storekeeper's wife, and she was still here, and the not speaking of it was the loudest thing the house had ever said to her. She stayed, and the staying turned without anyone deciding it out loud into something that almost looked like a life. Summer came up the mountain. It came the way the dark had come that first night, all at once the snow gone off the high ridges and the meadows turning, and Adeline Greer found that her days had filled themselves. She made a garden. That was the first thing. She found a patch of ground behind the kitchen that caught the morning sun, and she turned it with her own hands, and into it she put the seeds she had carried 400 miles in a twist of paper at the bottom of her satchel. Her mother's seeds, feverfew and chamomile and mullein, and the broad coarse leaves of comfrey, and she planted them and watered them, and they came up green and certain, and something in her chest came up green with them. And then the valley started to come to her. It started small. A boy from a homestead down the South Fork run through the hand with a rusted nail, and his mother too poor and too far from Coldwater to think of Dr. Pruitt and his fee. Adeline drew the poison and packed the wound, and the boy kept the hand. And the mother told another mother, because that is how it has always traveled, the news of a healer, mouth to mouth, woman to woman, faster and surer than any newspaper. By midsummer, there was a path worn to the kitchen door. A burn, a birthing that had turned hard, and Adeline up all night with it, her mother's hands inside her own. An old man's cough, a child's fever. They came and they brought what they could, eggs and cloth, and once a whole smoked ham, and they called her Mrs. Greer, which was not right, and they called her the Drennan woman, which was not right either. And slowly, the way a creek finds its bed, they simply called her the healer up at Three Pines. And the more they called her that, the harder a certain man's jaw set 3 hours down the mountain in Coldwater. But that was 3 hours away. And up on the mountain in the long gold light of that summer, Adeline was happier than she had let herself be in 2 years, and she knew it, and she was afraid of it, the way you are afraid of holding something you have already once watched break. She and Garrett had built something. She did not have a name for it. It had been built out of small things. Out of the morning, he came into the kitchen and found her struggling with the stovepipe and fixed it without a word and drank his coffee and went out, and that was all. And it had felt like a conversation. Out of the evening, she found her mended boots had been mended again, the other sole this time, and she had looked across the supper table, not at Asa, but at Garrett. And Garrett had looked very hard at his plate, and she had understood that the language of carried things was not Asa's alone. It ran in the family. Out of the porch. The porch was the heart of it. After supper, when the work was done and the light went lun and gold, Garrett Drennan had taken to sitting on the porch in the cool, and Adeline had taken to sitting there too, and there were two chairs in a careful distance of 3 feet of plank between them, and they would watch the dark come up the valley and not speak, and the not speaking had stopped being a wall. It had become a room they sat in together. He told her things on the porch that he told no one. He told her about the price of cattle and the worry of the winter feed. He told her once the name of the dog, which was Captain, and the story of the dog, which was a good story, and made her laugh, and he had watched her laugh with an expression she did not let herself examine too closely. He did not tell her about Lenora, not once. The wife's name was a room in him with the door shut, and Adeline did not knock on it because she of all people understood a shut door. And he did not tell her about the letters. The letters sat between them like the third chair no one used. She knew he had written them. Wesley had as good as said it that first terrible night. The words in the letters were Garrett's, but Garrett had never claimed them, never once, and Adeline had begun to understand a thing about this man that broke her heart a little every time she looked straight at it. He did not believe the words were allowed to be his. He had written them in some hour of weakness, some hour when the man he used to be had come back up out of the grief for one night. And then Wesley had taken them and signed them and sent them. And Garrett had let it happen. Because in Garrett Drennan's arithmetic, a woman might come for the man in those letters, the man who noticed the light on the mountains. But no woman would come for what he believed himself to actually be. A widower who had failed the one wife he had, a father who could not fix a doll. So he had let his brother lend him a self he thought he deserved more than his own. And Adeline, who had crossed a country for those words, had to sit 3 feet from the man who truly wrote them and pretend the chair between them was empty. It was Etta who knocked the chair over. It was a Sunday. Their brothers had ridden the high fence line, and the house was quiet, and Adeline was teaching Etta her letters at the kitchen table, the real ones, the alphabet, because she had discovered that no one in this house of grieving men had thought to, and the child was hungry for it, the way she was hungry for everything, now that the house had a little laughter back in it. Etta was writing her A's on a slate. And then Etta said, not looking up in the offhand way children deliver the things that stop your heart. Your hand makes letters like paws. Adeline went still. Does it? She said. In the book? Etta kept writing, curl, curl, the chalk squeaking. Pa's book that he writes in at night. I am not supposed to know about it. But the loose board under his window squeaks, and I know which board. And I looked once. She glanced up suddenly anxious, a child who has said a forbidden thing. Do not tell him. I will not tell him, Adeline said. Her voice came out level. She did not know how. Etta, this book, has it always been there? Since before. Etta's face did the thing it did at the word before the small closing. Before was the word this house used for the time when Lenora was alive. Mama gave it to him to write the pretty things in because he used to say pretty thing. She frowned down at a crooked A. He does not say them out loud anymore, but I think he still writes them because the book got fatter. The book got fatter. Adeline sat at the kitchen table with the summer light coming through the window and a 6-year-old squeaking chalk beside her, and she felt the whole shape of it arrive at last complete, and she had to put her hands flat on the table. There was a book. Lenora had given it to him, to hold the pretty things, the noticing things, the way light came down a mountain, and he had filled it before the grief. And then the grief had come, and he had stopped saying such things out loud, stopped them entirely, walled them up. But the book had got fatter. He had never stopped. All 3 of those silent grieving years, the man on the porch had been climbing in through his own shut door in the dark by candle to write down the beautiful things he no longer believed he had the right to feel out loud. And last autumn, his brother had found that book. And Wesley had not invented a single word of those letters. Wesley had copied them out of Garrett's own private book page by stolen page and signed Garrett's name to Garrett's own true heart and sent it to Ohio. And Garrett knew it. Garrett had known it from the moment he read that letter by his own mantle on her first night. and recognized every line. That was why he could not look at her. She had not fallen in love with a lie. She had fallen in love with the most secret and most honest thing this man owned, and he could not bear it. Because to admit the words were his was to admit he still had a heart that noticed the light, and a man who had failed his wife was not in his own court permitted to have such a thing. Adeline looked at the child writing her A's, and she made a decision. She would not pretend the chair was empty anymore. But the mountain as ever did not ask her timing, because that was the same week Ambrose Pruitt came back up the mountain. And this time he did not come alone. He came on a Thursday in the heavy still heat of late summer, and he brought two riders with him, and one of the riders wore a tin star. Adeline saw them from the garden. She straightened up with dirt on her hands and fever few at her feet, and watched the three horses come up the trail, and she knew. She had been waiting for it all summer the way you wait in this country for the first hard frost. You do not know the day, but you know it is coming, and you know what it ends. Garrett came out onto the porch, Wesley behind him. Asa, who could walk now with a cane Asa himself had carved, came to the door and stood in it. The sheriff was a tired man named Holloway who did not want to be there. Adeline could read that off him at 30 feet. But Pruitt sat his horse like a man at the front of a procession he had been planning a long while, and his brick face was calm, and his small eyes found Adeline across the yard and stayed on her. Mr. Drennan, Pruitt did not get down. I'm sorry to bring the law to your door, but the law is what it is, and a complaint has been made, and Sheriff Holloway is obliged to act on it. What complaint? Garrett said. That the woman you are keeping here is practicing medicine in this territory without license, without training, without any lawful right whatsoever. Pruitt's voice carried. He had a voice built to carry a church voice. There is a child down the South Fork she dosed with bark tea. There is the Aldous birthing she attended. There is your own brother whom she cut. These are not small things, Mr. Drennan. People have died of less than folk medicine in the hands of the unqualified. My brother is standing in that doorway, Garrett said, on the legs she saved. Today he is. And Adeline watched Garrett's hand close slowly into a fist at his side. There is more. Pruitt let it sit a moment. He was enjoying this under the brick, and the enjoyment was the worst thing about him, worse than the cruelty, because the cruelty at least was hot, and this was cold. Sheriff Holloway was good enough to send a wire east to satisfy the complaint properly. To the town this woman came from. Do you know what came back? The yard had gone very quiet. Adeline's heart was a slow, hard drum. Adeline Greer, said Dr. Pruitt, and now he looked only at her, was put out of her last town for exactly this. A man died in her care. A formal accusation was raised against her. Unlawful practice. She did not stay to answer it. She ran. She ran 400 miles and changed nothing but the scenery, and she has been doing the same dangerous work up here on this mountain in your house around your daughter ever since. He let it land. He had built this carefully. She had to give the devil that. He had not come to accuse a stranger. He had come to reveal one, and there is no weapon on God's earth quite like a true thing told by a man who means you harm. Garrett did not look at her. That was the part Adeline would carry. Through everything that came after that was the splinter that stayed in deepest. He did not turn his head. He stood on his porch and looked at Dr. Pruitt, and his face had gone back to the shut stone face of her first night on the mountain. The wall back up, 3 years of it, and she watched him not look at her and felt the summer end. Is it true? Garrett said. He was asking her. He still did not turn. Yes, Adeline said. Her voice did not break. She had promised herself a long time ago it would never break in front of men like Pruitt, and she kept the promise now, though it cost her. A man died. I told you the truth of it your first night. Garrett, the whole truth, every word. An old man whose heart was failing, who 2 doctors had already left to die, who asked me to ease his end. I did not run from a thing I did. I ran from a thing they decided about me. There is a difference, and you know there is, because you have a brother walking on a leg the law would have let rot. She admits it, Pruitt said comfortably. I admit nothing but the truth, Adeline said, which is more than you have ever done, doctor. It was the wrong thing to say. She knew it leaving her mouth. You do not corner a careful man in front of a sheriff. But she was tired and she was frightened, and the man she loved was standing 20 feet away, refusing to turn his head, and something in her could not stand quiet and be buried a second time. Pruitt's face did not change, but his eyes did. Sheriff, he said, I think you have heard enough to know your duty. Holloway shifted in his saddle. He did not like it, but the badge was the badge. Miss Greer. He would not meet her eyes either. There is to be a hearing in Coldwater. The magistrate rides through in 3 weeks, and he will hear the complaint then. And until that day, you are not to practice, not a poultice, not a tea, nothing. If you are found to have treated so much as a splinter before that hearing, the complaint becomes a charge, and a charge is a jailable thing. Do you understand me? I understand you, Adeline said. And Holloway hesitated. He glanced miserable at the porch. Begging your pardon, Mr. Drennan, but the complaint names your household. There is a minor child here. Until the magistrate has ruled, it would be best for everyone if the woman were to lodge in town where matters can be observed. There it was. They were not only going to forbid her work, they were going to take her out of this house, away from Etta, away from the garden, away from the porch with its 3 feet of plank, and put her in Coldwater under the eye of the very man who wanted her gone for 3 weeks, with a hearing at the end of it that Ambrose Pruitt had already half won by the simple cruelty of telling the truth about her. And she looked finally openly at Garrett Drennan. She looked at him, and she let him see all of it, the fear and the plea, and the whole unhidden weight of what she was asking, which was only this. Say no. Say she stays. Say it the way you would say it if she were already your wife. Turn your head and look at me and be for one moment the man who wrote the book. Garrett Drennan looked back at her, and Adeline saw the war in him. She did not doubt the war then or ever. She saw a man who wanted with everything left in him to step down off that porch and put himself between her and the world. And she saw the war lost. Because behind Garrett in the doorway stood the leg his brother had nearly died of. And down the South Fork was a child who had taken her bark tea. And 3 years ago, a fever had come into this house, and a doctor had stood in this same yard and said the will of God, and Garrett had trusted the medicine of the established world. And the medicine of the established world had carried his wife out the door in a box. And now the established world stood in his yard again, with a star, with a true and ugly fact, saying this woman is a danger around your daughter, and a child has died of less. The word child did to Garrett what Pruitt had built it to do. Go to town, Adeline. His voice was a stranger's, flat, carefully empty, the voice of a man holding a door shut against his own hands. Until the hearing, it is only 3 weeks. It is the lawful thing. Garrett, it is the lawful thing, he said again louder, as if the second saying could make it the kind thing, and it could not, and they both knew it could not. Adeline stood in her garden with the fever few at her feet. She did not cry. She wanted that on the record of her own heart later. She did not give Ambrose Pruitt 1 wet inch of her. She wiped the dirt from her hands on her apron, slow finger by finger, and she walked past the 3 mounted men and up the steps and into the house to gather the few things that were hers, and she passed within a foot of Garrett Drennan on the porch, and he did not reach for her, and she did not slow. But Etta did. Etta came flying out of the kitchen with the slate still in her hand, the crooked A still on it, and the child wrapped both arms around Adeline's waist and held on with the whole of her small, fierce body, and said into Adeline's apron, in a voice that was not small at all anymore, that was the loudest thing that house had heard in 3 years. No, no, you have to fix things. You fix things. Pa, she fixes things. And Garrett Drennan closed his eyes. Adeline knelt down. She took the child's face in both her hands the way she had that first morning, level eye to eye. Listen to me, she said. Bess has two good arms now, and they will stay on. Whatever happens, some things, once they are mended, stay mended. Do you understand me, Etta? Some things stay. It was a promise, and she did not know kneeling there whether it was a promise she would be allowed to keep. She rode down the mountain between the sheriff and the doctor. And she did not look back because she had learned long ago that looking back costs you more than it ever returns. But at the bend in the trail where the timber opened, she could not help it. She was only a person, and she turned her head. The porch was empty. Garrett had gone inside. And Adeline Greer faced down the mountain toward Coldwater in the small, ugly room in the 3 weeks in the hearing, and told herself the thing her mother had told her, the thing that was true and was not comfort. Winter always ends. It does. It just does not tell you what it takes with it. What she did not know, riding down into the dusk with her ruined name in her forbidden hands, was that the answer to the only question still worth asking, the question of what had truly killed Lenora Drennan 3 years ago in that quiet house, was riding in the saddlebag right beside her. Ambrose Pruitt's own records, his own hand. The case notes of a fever 3 years buried carried up that mountain and back down, again by accident, the way a man carries the seed that will one day split his own foundation. And Adeline Greer was going to find it. Coldwater gave Adeline a room above the storekeeper's place, and the room was small and clean and faced the street, and she hated it. Not the room, the window. Because the window looked down on the town, and the town, in the 3 weeks of waiting, looked back. She felt it every time as she crossed the street for flour. The pause in the talk on the church steps, the mothers who pulled their children a half step closer. Pruitt had done his work well. He had not needed to lie. He had simply walked her true and crooked story through every door in Coldwater and let the truth do the wounding the way only the truth can. She did not practice. She kept her word. A boy fell off the church roof in the 2nd week and broke his wrist clean through, and Adeline stood in the road with her hands curled into fists at her sides and let Dr. Pruitt set it badly because to step forward was a jailable thing, and she had a hearing in 9 days, and she could not afford the mountain to be right about her. She was so tired. She was tired in a way that sleep did not touch the particular exhaustion of a person being slowly, lawfully erased. And Garrett did not come. That was the cut under all the other cuts. 3 weeks. Wesley came twice awkward and kind, bringing her trunk down from the store and a basket from the garden and news she did not ask for. Asa came once, said almost nothing, left a carved thing on her table that turned out to be a small wooden bird, and she had to sit down after he left. But Garrett did not come, and she told herself it was better so. She told herself a clean break heals faster than a wound kept open. She told herself she had been a fool to read a whole life into a book she had only heard described by a child. She told herself a great many sensible things. And then it was the last week of summer, and the lung sickness came down the valley, and none of the sensible things mattered at all. It came the way these things always came. Quiet first, a cough in the back pew, a homestead down the South Fork where 2 children had taken to their beds. And then it was everywhere at once, in the schoolhouse, in the church, in the clace hot rooms above the stores, a sickness that settled deep in the chest and held on. And Coldwater learned the way frontier towns always relearned how thin the wall is between an ordinary week and a season of digging graves. Dr. Pruitt rode himself ragged. Adeline would give him that and only that. He went house to house with his black bag and his tinctures that smelled of nothing, and the sickness went house to house behind him, and it did not care about his license any more than the mountain had cared about her boots. And Adeline Greer stood at her window above the store and watched a town get sick, with her hands tied by a law in a hearing. She knew what the chest fever wanted. She knew it the way her mother had known it. She knew the mullein and the horehound that could ease a deep cough, the Ella campaign that could loosen a chest the way a key loosens a lock, the steam and the time and the long patient nursing that was in the end most of the medicine. She knew and she could not, and the knowing and the not doing sat in her like a stone. Then on a gray Tuesday, Wesley Drennan's horse came down the street at a dead run. She was on the stairs before he had stopped it. She knew. A body knows. Etta, Wesley said. His face was the color of tallow. It is in her chest, Adeline. Since the night before last. Garrett would not. He sent for Pruitt. Pruitt came. Pruitt gave her the syrup and said, keep her warm and wait. He had to stop. He had ridden hard and the words came in pieces. She is not waiting, Adeline. She is getting worse. She sounds the way. He did not finish it. He did not have to. She sounds the way Lenora sounded. And Adeline Greer stood on the storekeeper's stairs with the whole machinery of her ruin around her, the hearing 6 days off the magistrate already on the road, the one clear law that if she touched a sick child now, she would not see the outside of a jail. And there was nothing to decide. That was the strange thing. She had thought all those nights at the window that if this moment came, it would be a great wrenching choice. It was not a choice. It was just her legs already moving. Saddle me a horse, she said. I am going up the mountain. The ride up was the longest hour of her life. The mountain that had nearly killed her in the dark months ago let her pass now, and she barely saw it. The timber and the climbing trail going by in a gray streaming blur, and she ran the arithmetic the whole way. The only arithmetic, fever in hours in the size of a 6-year-old's chest. She came into the yard at a gallop and was off the horse before it had fully stopped, and the front door of the house opened, and Garrett Drennan stood in it. 3 weeks since she had seen his face. He looked as though he had not slept in all of them. He looked, in fact, exactly the way he had looked in the timbers clearing the day the tree came down on Asa, a man watching the water close over someone he loved, and when he saw her at the bottom of his steps with her satchel in her hand, something broke across his face that she had no name for and did not stop to find one. You should not be here, he said. Adeline, the hearing. If they find you treated her, you will be. Move, Adeline said. They will jail you. Then they will jail me. Move Garrett. And Garrett Drennan looked down at the woman who had ridden up the mountain into the certain ruin of her own life to reach his child. And he moved. The room was hot and dark, and Adeline crossed it in 4 strides and went down on her knees by the bed, and one look told her everything Wesley's broken words had not. Etta was very ill. The fever had her. Her small face was flushed and slack, and her hair stuck dark to her temples, and her breathing, that was the thing. Her breathing was a high, tight, rasping climb, each one a small fight, and the ragdoll Bess lay against her cheek with both her good mended arms, and Adeline had one cold, clear instant of standing on the edge of the same grave this house had stood at 3 years before. Then her mother's hands took over. I need the fire built high, she said, and her voice came out level and certain, and it changed the whole room. She heard it change, 3 frightened men suddenly given a thing to do. I need every pot you own, boiled. I need that window shut and these blankets off her, all but one. The fever has to climb out, not bake in. Wesley, the garden, the tall yellow flowers by the south fence mullein, bring me all of it, and the gray-green leaves beside and run. Asa, your time, the bunches drying in the kitchen rafters, all of them. Garrett. She looked up at him. You stay, she said. You stay right here, and you do exactly as I tell you, because I am not going to let you stand in a doorway again. Not this time. And Garrett Drennan, who gave the orders on this mountain, who had given orders to all of them his whole life, knelt down beside her on the floor by his daughter's bed and said, tell me what to do. They built a tent. They draped a sheet over the bed frame, and under it Adeline set a basin, and into the basin went the boiling water and the crushed thyme and the bruised aromatic leaves, and the steam rose and the child breathed it. They took it in turns to keep the water hot. They bathed her wrists and her throat and her forehead with cloths wrung from cool water steeped in feverfew. Adeline got the mullein tea into her a spoonful at a time, patient endless, tilting the small head, and between the spoonfuls she pressed her ear or more to the small chest and listened and listened. and waited for the rasp to change. The light went, the dark came up the valley, and the long night began, the one Adeline would never afterward be able to tell as a story with a beginning and a middle, because inside it there was no time. There was only the next breath and the next spoonful in the next basin of steam. Wesley sat against the wall with his hands open and useless in his lap. Asa stood in the doorway leaning on his carved cane, a sentry against nothing. And Garrett did not leave her side. Hour after hour, he held the lamp where she needed it. He lifted his daughter when Adeline needed her lifted. He learned the claws, the rhythm of them, and after midnight, without a word, he simply began doing the cooling himself, his big, calloused hands gone gentle, as a woman's at the work. And Adeline watched a man who believed he had failed everyone he loved kneel in the dark and refuse this time to fail. It was somewhere at the blackest hour, the hour with no name. When Garrett spoke, "I read it every night," he said. Adeline did not stop her hands, but she had gone very still inside. "The book." His voice was low and rough-pitched under the rasp of the child's breathing, a confession made into the dark because the dark was the only place he could make it. "Lenora gave it to me, to write the things I noticed. I used to. I noticed that everything, Adeline. I was that kind of fool of a young man. And then she got sick. And Pruitt came, and Pruitt said the things doctors say, and I believed him because believing him was easier than the other thing. And she died in that bed, the same bed." His jaw worked. "And I decided a man who could not save his own wife had no business noticing how pretty the light was. So I stopped saying it, all of it. I just—" "You wrote it instead," Adeline said softly, "in the dark, where it did not count." His head came up. "Etta told me," she said, "about the loose board. Garrett. I have known for weeks now. And on the porch all those evenings before that, some part of me had already begun to suspect. I knew you wrote every word that brought me up this mountain, and I knew you could not say so, and I let the chair sit empty between us because I thought you needed the door kept shut." "Adeline, those were your words." She turned and looked at him full across the small, fevered body of his child in the lamplight. "Not Wesley's. Wesley only copied them. A man who notices the light on the mountain. A man who knows grief learns to sit quieter but never leaves. That is not a man you stopped being 3 years ago, Garrett Drennan. That is a man who has been writing in a book by candlelight every single night since because he was too afraid to be caught still alive." The room held its breath, or perhaps that was only her. "I did not write you a letter," Garrett said. The same words, the exact words he had said to her on the porch her first night. But they came out of him now stripped of every defense, and they meant the opposite thing. And his eyes were wet, and he did not turn his face away to hide it, and that was the moment Adeline knew the wall was finally fully down. "I did not write you a letter. I wrote down my whole heart for years and never meant a living soul to see it. And then a woman walked up my mountain because of it. And I have spent every day since terrified that she came for the man in that book. And not for me, Garrett, because I am not him anymore. I do not know how to be him." "You are him right now," he said. "You have been him all night, on your knees, in the dark, refusing to lose her." Her own voice was not quite steady, and for once she let it not be. "I did not come up this mountain for a book. I came back up it tonight into a jail sentence for you and for that child. A book cannot break your heart. Only a person can do that. And you, Garrett Drennan, you have been breaking mine very thoroughly since the first night, so do not tell me I love a man who does not exist. I have his daughter's fever in my hands. He is exactly that real." And Garrett, Drennan reached across his child and took Adeline's free hand in his calloused palm to chapped palm, and neither of them said anything else because the rasp in the bed between them had just very slightly changed. It changed near dawn. Adeline had her ear to the small chest, and she felt it before she heard it. The loosening, the deep, wet break of a cough that finally moved something. And Etta's breathing came down out of that high, tight climb, one rung, then another, slowing, deepening, and the burning skin under Adeline's hand went all at once slick with sweat. The fever broke like a held note finally released. Adeline lifted her head. The window had gone gray. The first pale light of the morning was coming up the valley, and it came in through the glass and lay across the bed, and Etta Drennan opened her eyes in it. She looked at the steam tent. She looked at her father. She looked at Adeline, and she said in a small, cracked, ordinary miracle of a voice, "You came back." "I told you," Adeline said. She found she could barely speak. "Some things stay mended." Garrett made a sound, one sound, and then the man who had not wept at his own wife's grave, who had locked it all in a book for 3 years, put his face down against the quilt beside his daughter. And his shoulders shook, and Adeline put her hand on his back and held it there and let him break, because she knew the way she had always known these things, that he would be whole on the other side of it. She did not have long to rest in it, because the light was up now. And 6 days off, there was a magistrate, and down the mountain, there was a town drowning in the same fever. And Adeline Greer had just knowingly, with 3 witnesses, broken the law. She thought that was the danger still ahead of her. She did not yet know the danger was about to come up the mountain on a lathered horse and ask her of all the people in the world for help. It was past noon when the rider came. Adeline was on the porch. She had slept 2 hours in the chair by Etta's bed and woken to broth and the child sitting up against the pillows, teaching Bess her letters. And she had come out into the light on legs that did not quite belong to her. And Garrett had come out beside her, close beside her, the 3 feet of plank between them gone for good. And a horse came up the trail, badly ridden by a man who did not ride. It was the storekeeper's boy from Coldwater, the same boy near enough who had pointed up the mountain months ago. He half fell off the horse and stood in the yard, gasping, and what he gasped was a thing Adeline made him say twice, because the first time she could not believe the shape of it. Dr. Pruitt had sent him. Dr. Ambrose Pruitt, who had ruined her name in every doorway in Coldwater, who had tied her hands with a hearing, who had stood in this very yard and called her a danger to children. That man had sent a boy up a mountain to beg Adeline Greer to come. "It is his granddaughter," the boy said. "Little Mary, the doctor's own. The fever has her bad missus real bad, and the doctor has tried everything in his bag, and she is going the way the others went, and he—" The boy stopped. He looked this child deeply embarrassed for the grown world. "He was crying, Mrs., the boy said. "The doctor was crying. He said to tell you he knows what he has got no right to ask. He said to tell you he is asking anyway." Adeline stood on the porch, and the silence that came down was the loudest of the whole story. Because here at last was the thing. Here was the moment she had been owed. Ambrose Pruitt, the architect of her ruin, brought to his knees, sending a child to beg the woman he had tried to break. She could say no. She had every earthly right to say no. She could let the law he loved so much sit on its hands the way it had made her sit on hers. She could let Ambrose Pruitt learn in the worst possible classroom exactly how it felt. It would have been so easy. And she heard standing there her own mother's voice, not telling her what to do. Her mother had never told her what to do. Just the old plain words her mother had said over every sickbed of every soul who had ever wronged her, the words that were the whole of the medicine. "The fever does not care who deserves it, so neither can we." "Garrett," Adeline said, "I need the satchel and the fast horse." He was already turning to get them. But he stopped, and he looked at her, and there was something on his face that was plain wonder, the look of a man watching another person be larger than he had known a person could be. "He tried to destroy you," Garrett said, not arguing, just needing to say the size of it out loud. "Yes," Adeline said, "he did. And his granddaughter is 6 years old, and her chest is closing, and she has not done a single thing to me." She picked up her shawl. "I do not get to choose her grandfather for her Garrett. I only get to choose what kind of healer rides down that mountain. And I have already chosen. I chose it on my knees by your daughter's bed last night, and I am not going to unchoose it now, because the next bed belongs to a man I have every reason to hate." She went down the steps, And Garrett Drennan said behind her, "Then we ride together." The doctor's house in Coldwater was the finest in the town, and the fear inside it was exactly the same fear as in the poorest cabin on the South Fork. And Adeline learned that day, and the 2 days after that, this was perhaps the truest thing medicine had ever taught her. The fever was no respecter of houses. She did for Mary Pruitt what she had done for Etta. The steam, the tent, the malign, and the time, the long unsleeping nursing. And Ambrose Pruitt, who had 11 years of being the only voice that mattered, stood back against the wall of his own granddaughter's room and watched a woman with leaves do the thing his black bag could not. And he did not say folk nonsense, and he did not say luck. He did not say anything for a long time. And on the second night, when the child's fever finally broke, the way Etta's had broken, when the rasp came down out of the climb, and little Mary slept a true sleep at last, Ambrose Pruitt walked out of the room and stood in his fine hallway, and Adeline followed him out because she had seen all day that there was a thing in the man trying to get free, and she was too tired to wait for it politely. "Say it," she said, "whatever it is. Say it, doctor. I have not slept in 2 days, and I have no patience left for the long way around." And Pruitt, this hard, cold, careful man, looked at the floor of his own house like a boy. "Lenora Drennan," he said. Adeline went still. 3 years ago, his voice had nothing left in it, none of the church, none of the carry, just an old man in a hallway. She took the chest fever, the same as this, the same as all of them. And I treated her the way I had been taught, the way the books said and the books were. The books were wrong, Miss Greer. Or I read them wrong. I bled her. I gave her things that I now believe watching you these 2 days closed her chest tighter instead of opening it. She did not have to die. I have known it for 3 years. A stronger physician or an older woman with a basket of weeds might have. Might have. He could not finish it. And Garrett, Adeline said quietly, you let Garrett believe it was his fault, that he had waited too long to send for you, that his delay killed her. He needed somewhere to put it. Pruitt's voice cracked clean across. And I needed it not to be me. God forgive me. He was a grieving man, and I was a proud one, and I let a grieving man carry my mistake for 3 years because I could not bear to carry it myself. And then you came, with your leaves, and you started saving the ones I could not in front of the whole valley, and I could not stand it. So I tried to bury you the way I had buried the truth. Adeline stood in the fine hallway. She had ridden down this mountain expecting, if she was honest, to hate this moment if it ever came, to find some cold satisfaction in it. There was no satisfaction. There was only a tired old man who had let another man drown so that he himself could keep his feet dry, in a truth 3 years buried, in the quiet understanding that the truth, now that it was unburied, was going to change everything. You are going to tell him, she said, not for me, not for the hearing. You are going to tell Garrett Drennan to his face what truly killed his wife. Because that man has spent 3 years believing he murdered the woman he loved, and he has raised a motherless child inside that belief. And you, doctor, you are holding the key to a cell he has been locked in since the day you walked out of his yard. You will give him the key. Ambrose Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said, I will. The magistrate came to Coldwater 4 days later, and the hearing that Ambrose Pruitt had built so carefully to destroy Adeline Greer became instead the day the truth came out of its grave. The whole town packed into the church to see it. Of course they did. They came for a hanging that had been called a hearing. And what they got was Dr. Ambrose Pruitt rising from his bench in front of the magistrate and the sheriff and every soul in Coldwater and withdrawing his complaint. And then when the magistrate asked him why not stopping there, telling them why, telling them about a fever 3 years ago and a treatment that had failed and a grieving husband who had been allowed by a proud man's silence to believe the failure was his own. He told it plain he did not spare himself 1 inch of it. Adeline had not asked him to be that brave, and he was that brave anyway, and she understood watching him that a man finding his way back to his own honor late is still a man finding it. And he told them what he had watched her hands do. In his own granddaughter's room, he, Ambrose Pruitt, the only physician in the territory, stood up in a church and said that the woman they had been taught to fear had knowledge in her that he did not have, and that the valley was the poorer for every door that had been shut against her. The magistrate dismissed the complaint before noon, but it was not the magistrate Adeline was watching, it was Garrett. He sat in the second pew with Etta against his side, and Adeline watched the truth reach him. Watched 3 years come off a man in the space of a single morning. Watched him learn in front of his whole town that the thing he had been carrying, the thing that had walled him up and silenced him and turned his house into a quiet grave, the thing he had believed down to the floor of his soul was not true, had never been true. He did not weep this time. He simply turned his head and found Adeline across the church. And the look he gave her was the look of a man set down at last on solid ground. It was autumn full in gold on the mountain when Garrett Drennan asked her the question, and he did not ask it on the porch, and he did not ask it with a brother's borrowed words. He asked it in her garden. He had been working on something for weeks. She had known and pretended not to know the way you do, and on a clear, cold, bright morning, he walked her out to the patch of ground behind the kitchen, and there it stood, finished. A small building of timber and glass. Glass hauled 3 hours up a mountain pane by pane. A glass house built around her garden so that the feverfew and the chamomile and the comfrey, all her mother's green children, would live through the winters that had no mercy in them. Adeline stood and looked at it and could not speak. A healer should not have to lose her garden every winter, Garrett said. A healer should have what she needs to do her work. You built me a glass house. I built you a reason to believe I mean it. He turned to her, and he took both her hands, the chapped, healing hands that had saved his brother and his daughter, and the granddaughter of his enemy, and he held them, and the man who could not say the pretty things out loud said the only thing that mattered, plain in his own voice. No book, no brother, no candle, no dark. I have loved you since you stowed in my yard in your dead mother's boots and would not be sent away. I tried not to. I thought a man like me had used up his turn, but you walked back up this mountain into a jail cell for my child Adeline. And a man does not get to keep telling himself he is empty when someone has shown him that full. He took a breath. I am not asking for a housekeeper. I am not asking for a mother for Etta, though God knows you are already that. I am asking you to be my wife, my true wife, because I want you and because you are the bravest soul I have ever stood next to. And because this mountain has not had any laughter in it for 3 years until you carried some up the trail. Stay, not because you have nowhere else. I know you have somewhere else now. Stay because you choose to. And Adeline Greer, who had come west to escape being nobody, who had walked up this mountain months ago with $11 in a borrowed lie and a satchel of leaves, looked at the man in the glass house and the child watching hopefully from the kitchen window with Bess held up to watch too. I spent a long time, she said, being told what I was. A liar, a danger, a woman who should be grateful for whatever scraps she was handed. Her eyes were wet now, and she let them be. And then I came to a mountain that did not care what a town had decided about me. It only cared whether my hands were any good. So yes, Garrett, yes, I will stay and I will marry you, not because I have nowhere else to go. She smiled, and it was the first fully unafraid smile of her whole adult life. But because for the first time someone looked at the whole true, unhidden shape of me and asked me anyway. He kissed her then in the cold gold light with the glass house behind them and the mountain bright and enormous all around, and it was gentle, and it was the kind of thing that did not need any more telling than that. They were married before the first snow. In the little church in Coldwater, the same church that had once held a hearing meant to ruin her, and the pews were full because a healer who had ridden down a mountain to save the child of the man who wronged her is the kind of story a valley does not forget. And the doors that had shut against Adeline Greer had every one of them swung open. Dr. Pruitt was there, older, quieter. He had not left the territory in the end. Adeline had not asked him to. A man who tells the truth in a crowded church has begun the long work of being worth keeping, and besides, she had told him the valley needed all the healing. Hands had had his and hers both, and there was more than enough sickness for a proud doctor and a stubborn herb woman to learn slowly to stand beside each other. He had wept at the wedding. He seemed to do that now. It suited him better than the church voice ever had. Wesley stood up beside his brother and could not stop grinning. Asa stood on a leg that had healed strong and true, leaning not at all on the cane he still carried out of fondness. And when Adeline came down the aisle, the youngest Drennan, the silent one, the one who said things by the things he carried, had carved her something and set it in her hands at the altar. A wooden bird, not the small plain one from the room above the store. A whole flight of them joined wing to wing rising. And Etta. Etta carried the flowers and walked careful and proud, and Bess rode in the crook of her arm with both good mended arms held on tight, because some things once they are mended, stay mended. That was the winter the laughter came back to the house at Three Pines for good. It was a hard country. It stayed a hard country. The snow still came down off the high ridges with no mercy in it, and the work was still the work. But there was a glass house now behind the kitchen green, and impossible against the white, and there was a path worn to the door by every soul in the valley who woke in the night, afraid for someone they loved, and there was a woman at the heart of that house who had once been told she was nothing, and who had climbed a mountain in her dead mother's boots and decided otherwise. She had come to be married to a stranger. She had stayed because for the first time in her life someone saw the whole of her, the ruined name and the stubborn hands, and the unhidden heart, and did not ask her to be smaller. He asked her to stay. And on a mountain where grief had frozen everything solid, a woman with a satchel of leaves had taught a hard and silent family how to thaw. And the love that grew there in the worst soil in the shortest season grew anyway. It always does, wherever someone is brave enough to plant it.